there is a question here that is a simple one from Gary in North Wales. Will it go to the Supreme Court? So are we seeing a temporary reprieve, or is this simply more uncertainty?
Almost certainly going to the Supreme Court. The White House has already said they're going to appeal. There's one more level between here and the Supremes, but they might end up going straight there. That said, the legal basis for what Trump was trying to do was always very, very weak. And so while we all might have our own theories about the Supreme Court, I would be surprised if they end up overturning this.
That's interesting. Erin, let me come back to you, because at different points, Donald Trump has pivoted and rode back, and that's not been because of the outcry. It's principally because of what the markets have done, what has happened with bonds, and all of that. So a question in terms of that is, if Donald Trump's tariff, this is what Ian is asking, is currently illegal, does the US have to pay back all the tariffs that already have come in?
So the most important thing to note here is that the administration has appealed this ruling, and that means that we don't know what happens at this moment exactly. Certainly the administration has said that they want this to be on pause, they want this to be further adjudicated. And I was on the business program earlier this morning asking a lot of folks about this, and somebody who advises clients about the intersection of Wall Street and Washington was saying that his bet also is that nothing changes here. And I found that very interesting. We are getting people's predictions on what will change and what will not change. But the thing to know at this point is that the administration has petitioned the court to pause the enforcement of the ruling.
Ben, let's return to what the UK and US were talking about. Mark from Oxford says, will the deal be cancelled, or has the UK now agreed to pay the 10% and everything else which can't be cancelled?
Well, again, it goes back to what we were saying about the status of this deal. It is not a legally binding agreement as of yet. So in that sense, yes, the UK could turn around and say we are not going to honour it. And there may be pressure from some in the UK to do precisely that, because some in the agricultural sector were not happy with the increased access that certain US agricultural producers got to the UK market in terms of beef and ethanol. So that's one to watch. I think in terms of the 10% tariffs, the issue legally has been that the US, under this court ruling, will not be allowed to raise that revenue. So it's not a question of the UK committing to pay it. It's a question of the US not being able to take it. But it can take those tariff revenues from cars and from metals. And as I said earlier, that will be, I think, probably what the UK's priority will be, is to get this deal completed and get some mitigation for those sectors.
Justin, a question here from Brian, and it is a pretty basic question in terms of tariffs. We've talked about it for so many weeks. Who pays tariffs?
Let me start at the simplest possible answer, which is when the United States puts a tariff on Britain, it is taxing Americans who import a good. Literally, if I were to import an Aston Martin car and I want to drive it out of customs, they're going to make me pay the tariff. It gets slightly more complicated than that when you think about the economics of it. But in the first instance, it's the American who pays the tariff imposed by the American government. The way it gets slightly more complicated is I might say to my British Aston Martin dealer, hey, now that I have to pay tariffs, your car is unaffordable. Can you give me a bit of a break? Now, if they've got lots of other customers all around the world, they're going to be very unwilling to do that, in which case the American, will end up paying the full tariff. But if they don't have anywhere else to sell it and I couldn't afford the car without them giving me a price cut, maybe they would give me a little bit of a price cut. So the rule of thumb that my friends on Wall Street use is, for each $1 of tariffs, in the end, the American consumer is going to pay 70 cents. The retailer that I bought it from, the Aston Martin store in the US, would pay 15 cents, and the British exporter would pay 15 cents. So a very small fraction ends up coming out of the back pockets of the British.
Ben, let's follow on from that question from Andrew, who says, surely there'd be no need for trade tariffs if Americans stopped buying stuff from abroad.
Well, I suppose you could say this is what Donald Trump envisions, doesn't he? He envisions America producing so much that it won't matter whether or not there's a tariff on stuff coming into the US, because America will be producing and consuming what it entirely as a separate economy. I think the reality is, though, that America does rely to a considerable degree on imports from other countries. And that's not just finished goods, things like iPhones, it's actually components for its own manufacturing industry. And that's why, as Justin will know, the economists are saying these tariffs are so damaging because they could impede the ability of American producers to manufacture and produce for export and for their own consumption. So it's not as simple as saying America can simply hive itself off from the rest of the global economy. It is embedded in the global economy, and that's why tariffs really matter.
Justin, before I ask you the next question, I just want to play for people who are listening and watching this something that Donald Trump said in his most recent press conference, because he was asked about what some Wall Street analysts have been describing as taco tariffs. And that, of course, stands for Trump always chickens out. Well, that was the question put to Donald Trump. Let's just have a listen to his answer.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts the taco trade, they're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? 6 months ago, this country was stone cold dead. We had a dead country. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that. It's called negotiation. You say a number, but don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question. Go ahead.
Mr. President,
To me, that's the nastiest question.
Justin, let me bring you on that because aside from this court decision in the last 24 hours, it's